How's it going, everybody? Welcome into the Skyline Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jack Hartman, joined, as always, by my good buddy, my co-host on the West Coast, Nick Normand. Nick, how you doing today, man?
Doing pretty well today, Jack. Just getting over something. The reason we didn't record last week, my throat was absolutely raw when we would have recorded last week. So happy to be back with you. Happy that I'm able to actually talk and get my point across. Because last week I was holed up in bed for a good number of days.
Oh
Still
boy.
not quite at 100%, but probably 95% right now. But happy to be back with you. Just super stoked we'll be able to chop it back up again this week. How are you doing?
Yeah, no, I'm doing well. Doing well. My daughter turned 5 months old today, which is just crazy that we've had her for that long already. But no, life is good and enjoying the new year. And we're gonna talk NFL today, but we're not gonna necessarily talk playoffs. We might get to that, but what we are gonna talk about is these head coaching vacancies and one head coaching hire that has already happened. Black Monday, and it was more than just Black Monday. It lasted a while. Has been a little surprising. Not some stuff not so surprising. Other stuff more surprising. There's been a lot of weird going on too, especially related to Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys, which we'll get to. But let's just start by talking about the New England Patriots. The Patriots fired Gerard Mayo after one season. A lot of people were very speculative as to why this happened. The way I look at it, and Nick, I'd love to hear how you feel about it. But the way I look at it is he never had control of the locker room. There were reports after one of the games that the Patriots lost after Drake May was the starter. I forget which one. Reporters said like they were in the locker room. Drake May is over by himself, dejected that they lost. Everyone else in the locker room is acting like nothing even happened, or even as if they won. And I think that's a real strong sign of what the status of the locker room was. But on top of that, Gerard Mayo was an interesting hire for a lot of reasons. One, it was part of his contract that he was going to be the successor to Bill Belichick, which meant that the Patriots never had to open up interviews or anything like that. On top of that, he had basically no coaching experience. All of his coaching experience was as a positional coach for the New England Patriots. So it seemed like it was hey, we really want Gerard Mayo to be on our coaching staff, and so we're going to do this, maybe add this clause to keep him there. But we weren't expecting him to outlast Bill. Is sort of what it seemed like, and so here they are. So Nick, first and foremost, what are your thoughts about the firing of Gerard Mayo?
So Gerard Mayo, besides the report that you also just gave that somebody else dropped, there was also another really stark report that I just heard in the last week that after one of the games, it was an away game. And so when flying back home on the team plane, there are two sections of the plane normally where the coaches and front office folks are and where the players are. And he just decided after game, rather than watching film and breaking stuff down with the other coaches, that he was going to go sit back with all the players and did that. And that really rubbed some of the coaches wrong, that it kind of looked a little weird to the front office. And that there was just this air about him really not being ready for the job. Really a lot of talking about lack of discipline, lack of really being able to be a hard-nosed coach as far as having everybody do their job and leadership, those kind of ways. And so there were a lot of just tough reports for who was a first-time head coach and never really a coordinator. He was a play caller, I believe, as a defensive play caller at certain spurts of time. I believe the reports are as well before this year for the Patriots. But really seemed like it was a tough situation that the Patriots kind of forced themselves into with the previous contract kind of giving the reins over to him after Bill left. So really tough. I think there are a lot of parallels kind of between him and Antonio Pierce in some ways, both of those coaches getting fired after 1 year. And so I can completely agree with you there that it seemed like losing the locker room, if you ever had the locker room, was a really tough look for both of these coaches.
Yeah, 100%. And I think also, I mean, you look and you see Drake May, and you see how how good he is. I mean, we didn't see, we saw far less of him than we saw of Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams, but the talent that we saw definitely makes you think that in the end he might end up being the best of those three quarterbacks. I mean, he has talent, and so I think on top of everything that we've already said about Gerard Mayo, he also he's not the type of guy that you're looking to help you develop your young blossoming quarterback. And so it makes a lot of sense that happened, that they fired Gerard Mayo. And then they go and they hire Mike Vrabel. And I think, if we're being completely honest, I think that if they knew Mike Vrabel was going to be available last year when they lost Bill Belichick, they wouldn't have put that clause in Gerard Mayo's contract at all, because all of us, when Bill Belichick stepped down, were like, well, Mike Vrabel's the guy, right? I mean, he spent most of his playing career in New England. I mean, it just makes sense. So he got that job. I think the Patriots, I think Robert Kraft were like really, really nervous that, like, shoot, what if in this year, this off season, that we already have our guy, he gets another job, and then we've lost out on him. But that didn't happen. He was I think he was an offensive analyst for the Browns this year, or something like that. And so the Patriots go and get him. I think this is by far the best hire that they could have made. I think it makes a ton of sense. I think if there's anybody that's going to be able to instill the Bill Belichick way of football, but do it as a fresh face and a fresh voice in that locker room, which is really what I think the Patriots needed. They didn't need a complete change of the culture or anything like that. They want same culture, but with a guy that, is just a little fresher presence, fresher opinion. And I think that's who Mike Vrabel is. And I think this is going to pay dividends for the Patriots.
Mm-hmm. I feel you. I agree that Vrabel last year seemed like the natural fit before we all found out that Gerard Mayo had the clause in his contract to basically give him the keys to the kingdom then.
Yep.
But I think that New England getting their guy, even though they had to have that weird transitional year with Gerard Mayo, I think that Drake May having a coach that the two of them are going to be linked at the hip for the next couple of years, although Vrabel isn't an offensive guy or an offensive mind like that, I think to have a proven coach who's tough, who can instill a culture, who's still separate from Belichick, although having some Belichickian things about them, I think that it's really clear and obvious to me that Vrabel doesn't have the same downfalls as the other Bill Belichick disciple coaches, where Mike Vrabel never actually coached under Bill Belichick. He played under him for a number of years, but he was at Ohio State. He was with the Texans, I believe. He bounced around a little bit for a couple of years before landing with the Titans as their head coach around 2016, 17, 18-ish, one of those years. But Vrabel, I think he has the Patriot way without being beholden to being a Bill Belichick clone. He's already proven he can do his own thing and really be successful doing his own thing outside of New England. And all the other Patriot disciples haven't really been able to duplicate that outside of New England. So I really like Vrabel as the fit. I think Vrabel was by far at least one of the top two candidates this year, if not the top one. I think him and another coordinator currently that we're going to get to here soon as an option, I think are by far the two. I honestly don't think this is a great year for candidates as far as potential head coaches, but I think there are definitely going to be some interesting fits, even if they're not the greatest of candidates here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you look at Vrabel and like you said, not offensive guru, offensive minded head coach or anything like that. But if you look at what he did in Tennessee with Marcus Mariota and Ryan Tannehill, he got a lot of great play out of them. And since those guys left Tennessee, they haven't been a starting quarterback anywhere. They've either been a backup or haven't been on a roster. And so I think that just goes to show that, whatever his culture is, whatever he instills in when it comes to confidence in his quarterbacks, despite not being a guy that's, like a Ben Johnson and has, all of this offensive wit about him, he's able to get a lot out of him.
I feel you there. I really love Vrabel as a head coach. I feel like you can tell on the sideline that he believes in his team and his team believes in him, and that they're able to kind of level up with him as their head coach. And that's something that you're not getting really from any other head coaches this cycle, as far as stuff we've seen before, as far as potential head coaches, I would say. And especially as an underdog, the toughness. I remember seeing the betting statistics of Tomlin and Vrabel are by far the best underdog coaches against the spread and just generally like straight up against other teams as far as betting. Where as an underdog, Tomlin wins like 51 or 2 or 3, something in that ballpark, just straight up when he's an underdog at all. And Vrabel, when he's an underdog, puts up relatively similar numbers, which is really outstanding when Mike Tomlin's your comparison as a tough underdog coach as far as your record betting wise. And so I really like Vrabel as a floor raiser, and I think that's really what the Patriots need right now. They need a floor raiser to pull out of this nosedive of the post-Tom Brady era, to be honest.
Definitely. Let's move on to Dallas. This could be one that would be like, let's save this for last, but I think there's a lot of ripple effect with this one compared to some of the other ones. So to set the stage, Mike McCarthy was coaching on the last year of his contract this year. There were times that it was like, yeah, there's no way they bring him back. There were times that it was like, actually, maybe they should bring him back. There were times it was like, like you said, what other candidates are going to be out there that are going to do a better job than he has? We get to the end of the season. Chicago requests to do an interview. Dallas says, no, you can't. And then they decide, actually, we're moving on. Really, really weird, really interesting. It's just, to me, another example, of my opinion that Jerry Jones just doesn't know what he's doing with a lot of this stuff. So the Dallas head coaching job is available. I have 2 guys in mind that I think, these would be the 2 guys to go for. I've got a 1 and a 2. But Nick, let's start with you. Who are you looking to fill this position?
So I wrote down 4 names. Basically, before we started this recording, I was kind of breaking down potential candidates. We probably have 15, 16, 17, 18 potential candidates that I wrote down. And I broke them down into top current coordinators, dudes who have been coordinators, not head coaches, but good coordinators up to this point. Retread options of dudes who have been head coaches in the league. Just doesn't have to be like just fired, but like can be last couple of years, whatever, been a coordinator, whatever. And then kind of a group of other like college coaches or other sorts of former players, that kind of thing. And Dallas, I wrote down 4 names, and it was honestly one from each category of a retread, a current coordinator, a college coach, and somebody who's kind of a weird like post-playing career type player. First dude would happen to be Kellen Moore for me. I think that he really stands out to me as a candidate to fit Dallas. Not that he's exceptional in any way, but that it seems like Jerry Jones and the Cowboys are comfortable with him. And it seems like that's kind of what the Cowboys have wanted from a head coach for the last several years. Obviously, they want to win a Super Bowl, but they, more than anything, have hired head coaches they're comfortable with for the last several years. McCarthy was somebody they were comfortable with in that he was a Super Bowl winning head coach and somebody with a proven track record of being at the baseline at least. Maybe not far above it, but at that baseline. Next dude that I have on my list will be Pete Carroll. He's kind of more of the same of the rah guy, a retread, a Super Bowl winning head coach. I think that Pete Carroll has kind of shown through some of the reporting about him that he still wants to be a head coach in this league, that although Seattle and him parted ways last year, that it might not have necessarily been a mutual parting of ways, but that it was kind of being pushed out the door a little bit, which kind of sucks for if you're being pushed out of the door by a team that you won a Super Bowl with. Similar thing obviously happened to Belichick last year. Third dude I have on the list, primetime Deion Sanders with the Colorado Buffaloes. Reports are already out that if he got offered the job that he would take it. I think that probably the biggest drawback for Deion to the Cowboys would be if he wants to coach his son or Travis Hunter. I don't think the Cowboys feasibly can get either of those players in the draft potentially. And so I feel like that will be one of those like weird sort of circumstances of Dion being the Cowboys head coach, but you know that like he's been tied at the hip since his days at Jackson State the last couple of years, all through Colorado with these same two kids, his son and Travis Hunter. Fourth guy and last guy for the Cowboys. I've heard a lot of reporting through Cowboys media. I'm not a Cowboys fan, obviously. I'm a Steelers fan. But that Jason Witten is somebody who the Cowboys have identified as a kind of their guy in waiting, a guy that they really believe has some of the intangibles, the leadership of a head coach. And so although he has no track record of anything outside of being a high school head coach, it seems like that could be like a Jeff Saturday situation, similar to the Colts with Jeff Saturday a couple of years ago. So those are four guys who I think all are on the table with the Cowboys. And to be honest, I could see if all four of these guys, if none of them sign with the Cowboys, I could see none of them being NFL head coaches next year either, where I think that for all four of these guys, it's either Cowboys or not any other NFL job potentially, where it seems like this could be their only fit for all of them outside of potentially Sanders, who I think could fit somewhere else. I think right now I would probably lean Kellen Moore, where I think Kellen Moore is just the safe former Cowboys coordinator, somebody who they kind of wanted to make the Cowboys head coach previously and really kind of fits the level of comfort I think the Cowboys have. I'll wait for you to get back in a sec, Jack. The other spot, though, I'll just keep spieling on for a second. I think that Dion, if I were to put money probably on where Dion lands if he moved to the NFL, I think that it would either be the Cowboys or the Raiders. I think that the Raiders have Tom Brady, and Tom Brady in their operation, he wants to instill a sense of leadership and connection with his head coach. And I think that that's why you could see either Dion or another high-end potential head coaching candidate go to the Raiders. But I think that Dion's spots in the NFL would either be the Raiders or Cowboys. And I'd probably lean Kellen Moore for the Cowboys. But what are your thoughts on the Cowboys, Jack? Potential candidates for them? What direction do you kind of feel like they go?
Yeah, so I completely agree with you with Kellen Moore. That's who I have as my top option for them. A lot of that I do have because I think that it's, like you said, it's safe. I think Kellen Moore, if you hire Kellen Moore, it's just Jason Garrett the second. I won't even say 2.0, like it's a more developed Jason Garrett. It's just Jason Garrett the second. So I don't think Pete Carroll is a good option for them. I think hiring Pete Carroll is similar to trying to hire Bill Parcells, and I don't think Jerry wants that. I think it would work. I think it would be great for them, but I just don't think that Jerry wants that. Jerry makes it very clear that he wants to be the top guy there. Jason Witten, you mentioned it, similar to the Colts doing the Jeff Saturday thing, but the thing with that was Jeff Saturday was an interim head coach that it was made clear we're not going to hire you to be our head coach afterwards. If you just hire Jason Witten straight up as your head coach, like that would be very startling. And the last guy that you mentioned, Deion Sanders, I texted you yesterday when we decided this is what we were going to talk about, and I said that I have a hot take on Deion Sanders. And here's my hot take on Deion Sanders. I don't think that he would be a good NFL head coach at all. I don't think that Deion Sanders would be a good NFL head coach. And here's why. I think that the 19 to 22-year-old, 18 to 22-year-old, well, hey, nowadays it's like 17 to 24-year-old. But that range, the more kid than man section of football players, I think that is where he's at. I think that is the best spot for him. I think that he works as this incredible role model guy that's like, oh my gosh, this is like football royalty. But when you're in a professional locker room, it's like, dude, we're all professionals. You know, you have yes, you're like the cream of the crop when it comes to professionals, Deion Sanders that being, but still it's like you have that, look, I can show you how to get to the league and I can show you how to be successful in the league. This is my story. And when you're in an NFL locker room, all of those guys, like the big drawing factor when I see his speeches that he has, they just got back to school and they're starting winter workouts and going to do spring camp here in a couple months. And like all of the stuff that he's talking about and all the stuff that he's saying, it's like, if you're an NFL guy, you're like, why am I hearing this type stuff? Like you're like, I've already made it here, right? You don't need to convince me that like you can show me how to be, how to successfully get to the league. Like I'm already here, right? And so I just don't think that it's going to work. I really don't. I also I want to be proven wrong with this, and so I want him to stay in Colorado this year to prove me wrong, but I want him to prove to me that his coaching ability is built outside of the players that he has, right? He's had Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter his whole collegiate coaching career, or pretty much his whole collegiate coaching career. Travis Hunter is Travis Hunter, and Shedeur Sanders is Shedeur Sanders, right? I want to see that he can do it without having those guys. And also, I want him, if he does take an NFL job, like I don't want it to be like I'm coming in and like when he showed up to Chicago, I'm bringing my bags and they're Louis, and so I'm going to force my way to get my son, because like when you're in college, sure, that can work, but like guess what? If you're in the NFL and you go to the Raiders and you force your way to get your son and he's not good, like what are you going to do? Are you going to resign instead of benching your kid, or are you going to be willing to do that? And so that's just what makes me nervous about Deion Sanders as an NFL head coach. But I do have another college coach that I think would be a good hire for the Dallas Cowboys, and that is Steve Sarkisian out of the University of Texas. I think he's brought Texas back to relevance. They used to be, when we were kids, it was like, the Colt McCoy Texas team. And it was like, Texas was Texas, dude. And before our time, it was the Vince Young Texas team, right?
Yep.
Under Brown. And man, since Colt McCoy, they've had a little bit of success here and there. They had the Sam Ellinger days that was like, okay, this is interesting, won the Big 12 a couple times, but like not competing for national championships. But with Sark in the last 2 seasons, he's gotten them to the college football playoff. He is resurrected that program to the point that Texas is back to the point that they're picking they're picking and choosing from other squads their guys to come join them through the transfer portal. Like they had been one of those like minor league clubs basically for SEC teams before Sark got there. And so I think that Sark would be a really, really great NFL head coach. I think he's proven that. And so I would like to see the Cowboys at least, consider it. But the thing with Jerry Jones, and it's the reason that we're talking about the Cowboys so much, is because that's all he wants, is he wants people to talk about him. He doesn't actually, he says that all he cares about is winning a Super Bowl, but I think if he didn't win a Super Bowl, but every media outlet talked about the Cowboys every single day, he'd be happy. And so, but also part of my thing with Deion Sanders, I talked about it as NFL head coach in general, but with the Cowboys, if you hire Deion, like Jerry, no one's gonna care to come listen to you in the locker room. Like you don't have a press conference and you have everyone wanting to hear what you have to say every game. If Deion Sanders is there, they're gonna skip talking to you so they can talk to Deion Sanders. And I think Jerry knows that, and I don't think Jerry wants that. I think Jerry wants to have control. He wants to be the biggest star in Dallas. It's the reason that he fired Jimmy Johnson. It's the reason that he got rid of Bill Parcells. It's the reason that since then, the coaches have been guys like Jason Garrett and Mike McCarthy, which is not I'm not trying to disrespect them, but they're not big star guys. They are, I'm here to coach guys, which is good. And it's what the Cowboys have needed. I think the reason Jason Garrett was held on as long as he was is because he was a little pawn in Jerry's game of chess, right? And so that's why that's my thoughts on the Dallas head coaching position. I think that the Dallas head coaching position in NBA terms is like the Lakers head coaching position. It's the biggest brand in the sport, but in reality, you don't actually want it because you're not going to get paid very much. You're not going to get a chance to have a meteoric rise like you would in other places, because it's either expected you're good, and if you're good, then it's not because of you. It's because, well, duh, it's the Cowboys, or you're bad, and it's like, well, we got to get you out of here. And so that's sort of how I feel about the Dallas position.
I'm completely there with you. I think your comparison with Dallas's coach to the Lakers is completely accurate. I think that's a perfect comparison. So I'm 100% there with you. The one thing that I'll also add into this discussion about Dallas is that McCarthy wasn't fired. His contract was up, and Dallas wanted to keep him, and they tried to keep him, and they didn't want Chicago to interview him. And he basically spurned them, saying like, hey, you're not giving me enough respect. You're not giving me enough money. Like, you're causing me more stress and more issues than more good. And like, this is one of the few circumstances that a head coach actively is like trying to leave their team, who's a decent head coach at the very least, if not a good head coach.
Yep.
Like you almost never see a good head coach leave a team. Like Sean Payton sort of semi left the Saints through retirement means and getting traded in like weird circumstances with that. But it's incredibly rare that you see a really good, proven head coach leave a team after having reasonable success with them. And this is one of those few circumstances that I think really reflects Jerry Jones is lacking more than Mike McCarthy's lacking. And so I'm 100% there with you with all that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, let's move on to Chicago. Nick, I've got Mike McCarthy as my top candidate for the Chicago job. I think that would be best for them. I think, the idea of getting a young, up and coming, offensive mind, offensive guru for Chicago sounds great when you think about Caleb Williams, but I think we saw high highs and low lows out of Caleb Williams last year. And I think that what really needs to happen is we need to get that floor up higher with Caleb Williams, and we need to kind of like remove this idea of his growth being stunted that we sort of experienced last year. And I think a offensive minded head coach who has lots of experience and is going to show up and take care of his guy, take care of the quarterback there, is going to be the best thing for the Bears, instead of it being like, oh my gosh, look at this, we've got Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams, this huge, big, incredible, like, oh my gosh, match made in heaven. Just, a guy like Mike McCarthy who's like, listen, I'm a professional, I have experience, like, I'm just going to show up and I'm just going to do my thing. And Caleb Williams is the quarterback that I have. And so we're going to work together, but it's not built up to be bigger than it is. So I've got Mike McCarthy as my top candidate for this job. Behind him, I do have Marcus Freeman out of Notre Dame. I think what he has done with Notre Dame has been incredible. And I think teams are seeing that and noticing that. I think that Chicago would be the only place this cycle that he would go. He's familiar with that organization. He was actually drafted out of Ohio State to Chicago in 2009, and so I think they're willing to talk with him a little bit. But yeah, that's my thoughts on this Chicago head coaching vacancy. Nick, what about you?
So I'm there with you. I think McCarthy, I agree with you as well that McCarthy will probably be the safest head coach. And I think right now Chicago needs to hit a double. They don't need to hit a home run with this head coach. They need to not make a mistake that they had worse. And so one moment. So I'm there with you with McCarthy. I think that obviously Eberflus, it turned out to be a disaster. And Eberflus, I think, did have some good qualities as far as how he could coach a defense in some ways. But I think Eberflus obviously had way more warts, way more struggles, managing the clock, leader of men, organizing a team and a coaching staff. So I think there were a lot of issues with that. I would say McCarthy will be safe, somebody who can raise up Caleb's floor And I think that McCarthy with Caleb Williams could be very similar to Doug Peterson with Trevor Lawrence, where like for a year, you clean up what was a disaster first year for a rookie quarterback and really get them to play well and get a team to the playoffs, maybe even. I think that that could be what it looks like. I think that it could 2 years later turn into a disaster as it did with Doug Peterson and the Jaguars now. But I think that if you're probably looking for a good turnaround and picking the floor up from where it was as far as your young QB, I think that I'm there with you. I think that my other potential coaching candidates, I'm there with Freeman with you. I think that it makes a lot of sense as far as fit. I think that it'd be super interesting to see what happens with this national championship in the next couple of days, the next week, and see like if Notre Dame can win this whole thing, like what the heck happens? How do we feel about the whole college football landscape? I think if they lose, it'll just be like, okay, Ryan Day is going to get his flowers and like good for him. And Freeman's going to be like in a good spot, can definitely lock down the rest of the next 10 years, probably with Notre Dame being like, hey, I think if he wins the whole thing with Notre Dame, you're looking at he could have a bunch of potential opportunities to move into a bigger job, to lock up the next decade of his career easily with Notre Dame, to get an NFL job. I think every opportunity is open if he wins this. If he loses this, I still think he has a lot of good opportunities. So I think he's good there. I think the other guy, obviously, hottest offensive coordinator on the market, that would be obviously Ben Johnson of your Lions. I think that pairing the young superstar offensive mind with the young QB, especially a number one overall pick who was heralded as a generational prospect, best prospect since Trevor Lawrence, if not better than Lawrence as a prospect. I think that probably has a lower floor than McCarthy, but I think it has a higher ceiling by a really good margin than McCarthy. So I think that it really depends on what the Cowboys will be able to, the Bears will be able to do as far as finances. I think Ben Johnson could be asking for a lot of power and a lot of money from teams. And so I think that could limit his potential landing spots. I think that's already been reported the last couple of years. And so I'm really curious as far as when Johnson becomes a head coach, because he's going to become a head coach at some point in his career. I guarantee you that. Whether it's this year or not, he had opportunities last year and the year before that I think if he wanted to take them, he could have gotten the job. But I'm curious when he gets a head coaching job, where is that spot and why is that spot the spot that he chose? Sure. And so I'm curious about that. But I think Bears, I'm 100% there with you that McCarthy seems like the easy fit right there.
Yeah. I think a couple of things. One, with Marcus Freeman, I could absolutely see a world where this is him using leverage to get a better extension from Notre Dame. Now, again, if you win a national championship, then it feels like you'd get whatever extension you want, especially there because of how long it's been since they've had that success. But even still, if you can add on top of it, hey, I just got us a national championship and I might actually want to go and coach in the NFL. What are you going to do for me to make it worth me coming back? I think could be really good grounds for him in his negotiation. I think with Ben Johnson, I think that absolutely I agree with you. He's going to be a head coach someday. No doubt about that. I think he's absolutely the hottest candidate, out there right now. He was very, very picky and choosy last year too, right? Like he wasn't offered the Commander's job, but it was also kind of like, hey, like if you want this, right? And he was like, no, I don't. And I think because of how picky and choosy he is, I think everybody wants him to pick and choose Chicago. I don't necessarily know that that's actually the job that he wants, right? Like, I think he would rather go somewhere else, right? There are just so many skeletons in the closet of Chicago that it's like, hey, do I want my head coaching career, to almost end before it even starts if I go to Chicago, which is outside of Mike Ditka, like what we've seen with Bears coaches, right? So I don't know. I mean, he might want that job. I just think there are other more desirable places for him, and we'll get to where I think that is here in a little bit. Moving on, the New York Jets. Nick, who are you liking to fill this spot? Again, Robert Saleh got fired very early on. The Jets, man, the Jets are weird. I think that I genuinely think that we're seeing Woody Johnson being like, all right, you know what? I'm done with all of this. I'm done with all the crap. I'm done with getting a quarterback who's a diva and doing whatever he wants. I'm done with trying to get a guy that hasn't been good for, like acting like we're getting a guy who is who he was 7 years ago instead of who he is now. I think he's genuinely like, you know what? And I don't say that just about Aaron. I mean, think about all of the other guys they went and got. They went and got Randall Cobb. They went and got who's the offensive Tyron Smith, right? Like they've done that in a lot of different places. And
yeah.
Right, exactly. It's not just Aaron that I'm talking about with them doing that. Now, I think two of those guys, and Lazard and Cobb, they only got because Aaron was like, you better get these guys. But, I mean, all of the reports have been, one, that the Jets are just a dumpster fire, but two, that Woody Johnson was kind of done with Aaron Rodgers very early on in the season. Also reports he wasn't really, I mean, of course he was the owner, so he had to have okayed the hire of Robert Saleh, but like it wasn't his guy or whatever. I think he's going to make sure that the guy that they get is his guy and all of that sort of thing. So I would like to think that this last 2 years, this whole Aaron Rodgers saga has been a learning experience for the Jets. And if I'm being that optimistic, I have who I think the Jets would go after makes the most sense. But Nick, who do you think the Jets are gonna try to go after, or who do you think they should go after? Is actually what I should be saying.
I think that they should legitimately interview as many people as they can. I think you could turn over some stones and find some really good candidates potentially who are hiding under rocks that we're just not aware of at this point. So I think honestly every organization should interview as many people as possible. And that's not just Rooney rule, like talk to all those minority coaches because you have to, whatever. I think that if you interview a bunch of people, you're going to be able to meet new people, make new connections, learn something new, like figure things out. And so I think that you can definitely figure out, even if you're not hiring somebody to be your head coach, they could be your next coordinator of some kind. Like Robert Saleh, if you don't hire him as your head coach for one of these teams, you could definitely add him as your really good defensive coordinator, but interviewing him and making those connections matters a lot. I'll throw out, I think that he's not going to be my pick for this job, but I'd also throw out McCarthy as somebody who I think could clean up this mess with the Jets. I think McCarthy with Aaron with the situation there would just be funny, being a reunion with that. So I just like to think about that. I don't think that's my pick. So that's not the reunion that I'm gonna pick for this Jets team. The actual reunion that I think these two getting back together are gonna be the Jets actually with Rex Ryan. I think the Jets are in full on like nobody wants this job sort of situation. I think they have some good young players in Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, the Olu Fashanu, the tackle out of Penn State they drafted last year. I think they have a couple of good players. I think they have no coordinators worth a damn, not a good owner, not a great cap situation, not a great quarterback, not a great pick to get a young quarterback. So I think that they don't have any kind of hook to get anybody in the door or like really want the job. But the one dude who does want the job is Rex Ryan. He has said adamantly, I want to be the head coach of the New York Jets. And so I think that it could be a marriage we've seen before. I think it could be his time to come back into the NFL. I think that Aaron with Rex Ryan, if Aaron's back, I don't think that's an absolute disaster. I think they could get more wins than they did this year. I think the Jets underachieved this year. I don't think they were a playoff team this year in retrospect. But I think they easily could have gotten to 6-7 wins. And they lost a bunch of games due to some really weird circumstances. And so I feel like Rex Ryan is really the fit for a place that really nobody wants to go to. So
Yeah.
I'm with him.
Yeah, I have him here on my list. I have him as my second guy, even though I do think that he is the best option. I just don't think that the Jets are going to do it. I think they would be really smart to. I mean, since Joe Namath, the only success that franchise has had basically was when Rex Ryan was the head coach, making back-to-back AFC Championship games. And just being a team that was a really good team, was giving the Patriots a run for their money when it seemed like no one could touch the Patriots in that division, outside of the year that Tom Brady got hurt and Matt Castle was his backup for the whole year. But I think the Dolphins won the division that year. But that was the Brett Favre. That was when the Jets tried the Brett Favre thing.
That was Brett Favre and what's his name? Who Eric Mangini was the head coach that year. Actually, that was right before Rex.
But anyway, Rex Ryan and I mean, he came in after that and cleaned up that mess, right? And so I see no reason why he can't come in and clean up this mess. I think the Jets would be. I think that is the best hire for them. I just don't think that they'll do it. I'd like to think that I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but I just don't think they'll do it. So the guy that I have as the top guy there is Brian Flores. Brian Flores deserves to be a head coach in the NFL. He got done dirty with the whole Miami situation. He is by far, in my opinion, the best defensive coordinator candidate for a head coaching position in the NFL this go around. As a Lions fan, I love Aaron Glenn, but I gotta bow in reverence a little bit to what Brian Flores has done with Minnesota. And so, I mean, when you think about those young guys that the Jets have, especially on the defense, I think he would just be a perfect match for them. I think you would get so much out of that defense that was supposed to be like the next 85 Bears and wasn't, even though it has talent. I think he could actually get the best potential out of that talent, because I look at the Vikings defense this year. I mean, before this year, no one was looking at Van Ginkel as like one of the best defensive players in the NFL, right? Like before this year, people weren't really looking at Byron Murphy as one of the best DBs in the NFL. He was able to get that out of guys that certainly are less talented than some of the dudes that are on the defensive side of the football for the Jets. So imagine what he can get out of those. I could see him getting Sauce Gardner to be like the next Darrelle Revis in a Jets uniform. Like seriously, because the talent is there. So, so if they don't hire Rex Ryan, I'd really like it to be Brian Flores. I think if it's anybody else, it's probably not going to work out, and we're just going to go through another 3 years of Jets hot garbage. But that's sort of how I feel about that one. Jacksonville. I think that Jacksonville would be very, very wise to hire a defensive-minded head coach. Despite Trevor Lawrence and his struggles, I think I forget who it was. It may have been Dan Graziano or Dominique Foxworth on Get Up a couple days ago, talked about like, hey, you have a bright young future with a quarterback, so you want to get him an offensive-minded head coach. But if you get him an offensive-minded head coach, he can't just pour everything into that quarterback, because he has head coaching responsibilities that are outside of just the offensive room, right? And so with what we've seen of Trevor Lawrence, we've seen the high highs and we've seen the low lows with Trevor Lawrence. I say let's get a defensive-minded head coach, and then let's get a really, really good offensive coordinator in there. And so because of that, my top two candidates for this job would be Aaron Glenn and Robert Saleh. I think that those two guys, again, behind Brian Flores, are the best defensive-minded options that are out there. And I think that I think Robert Saleh deserves to be a head coach. I think that him getting fired was very, very surprising. I think that he did a great job with what he had while he was at the Jets. I think that when we look at Zach Wilson, we like to chalk it up as like, oh, well, the Jets always ruin young QBs. And I'm like, no, I think Zach Wilson was Zach Wilson about that. I don't think that was the Jets ruining a young QB. So I think Robert Saleh deserves to be a head coach in the NFL. I think Jacksonville could be a good place for that. Especially, turning around a defense that, I don't know. I can't really, outside of Trayvon Walker and Andre Sisco, I can't think of many guys on the defensive side of the football. And
Josh Allen, the other Josh Allen.
Right. The what's
Josh Allen.
Yeah. But anyway, I think both Aaron Glenn has proven this year that he can get guys just like Brian Flores to play far above what their talent level is. I mean, you can't go 15-2 in the NFL with that many of your defensive starters on the IR without having a great defensive coach, great defensive coordinator that can get the best out of those guys. So I think either one of those guys would be a great fit for Jacksonville, and I think would be what Jacksonville needs right now. What are you thinking?
Who would be your top pick? Just because I want to write them down just to keep track once all of these seats get filled in the next week or two. Like, I just want to see where our hits are.
My top is Aaron Glenn. It's really 1A and 1B. Aaron Glenn is 1A. Robert Saleh is 1B. This unlike like Dallas, I do view like Kellen Moore as 1, Steve Sarkisian as 2. This, I think you can't go wrong with either of them, but I do give the slight edge to Aaron Glenn, even though I'd rather him not get hired so he can come back as the defensive coordinator of the Lions. But
I'm there with you. Aaron Glenn's not my pick for this job, but something that I just wanted to note because I was looking at Aaron Glenn's Wikipedia. As a player, he played for the Jets, Texans, Cowboys, Jaguars, Saints. Of those 5 teams, 4 of them have head coaching openings right now. Jets, Cowboys, Jaguars, and Saints. So he's got connections to 4 of the teams with openings still. Yeah, I just find that interesting.
That is interesting.
I will say that he does have a connection to where I will put him to land with his coaching history. I won't say where it is now, but I will go with Brian Flores for this particular job with Jacksonville. I feel like Jacksonville has had a really tough time getting the right coach to be really tough on their players. And I think that Brian Flores is simultaneously very tough and a very smart defensive coordinator and defensive mind. And I think that Jacksonville, their defense has been a disaster, and they haven't had tough, hard-nosed coaching. And I think both of those things are exactly what the doctor ordered. I think that he simultaneously has shown to not just be an executive head coach of just telling his coordinators what to do and being very hands-off. I think Doug Peterson was more that way. And so I think they're going to want a more hands-on as far as one side of the ball coach compared to Peterson. And I think that really, although I think Jacksonville could go a number of ways, I feel like Flores is my pick as far as what would probably fit best. And I think probably where they would go. I feel like Jacksonville is more of a questionable spot for me in my mind as far as what the best fit is, but I'll go with Flores in this spot.
Cool. Moving on to New Orleans, who I think this is where you're probably going to slot in Aaron Glenn. So I'll let you go ahead and take this one first.
Yeah, that would be correct. I think that Aaron Glenn is going to fit right into New Orleans. I think that when we're looking at all of the top candidates, I think that there are so many candidates who already are in weird situations that they could either stay or leave. I don't think there are necessarily spots where you see a coordinator and it's like that coordinator is bound to be a head coach and this is their year and they're hot and they're like going for it. And so I feel like there aren't the clear and obvious candidates for a couple of dudes who are going to be hired this year. But I feel like Aaron Glenn, what he's done with the Lions defense that has really been devoid of talent due to the injuries, I think that it's been really impressive. I think that he's shown to be a good leader of men and still a lot of toughness, be a good defensive mind. And I really think that his connections back with that coaching staff when he coached their 2016 to 2020 with Sean Payton, as well as with their more recent head coach in Dennis Allen as well. In all honesty, I don't think that the Saints know what direction they want to go in. As far as I don't think the Saints are looking at it like, we need a proven head coach in this kind of way, or we need a smart offensive coordinator to pair with our young head coach, or we need a college guy who brings a lot of juice. I feel like the Saints, because of their cap situation, because they don't have a young QB to groom, because they're not an abject disaster as far as like needing to clean up a whole mess. I feel like they're kind of in this weird middle ground where they're not necessarily getting some of the top candidates, but they're not going to necessarily just go with some random weird pick. I feel like Aaron Glenn's a nice middle ground, checks a decent number of boxes, fits with the organization well, was a player and coach there. So I feel like Aaron Glenn makes natural sense as far as in New Orleans.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. There's been a lot of buzz there. I actually went offensive for this team.
Sure.
I don't know, just felt right, especially with a lot of their first wave of coaching interviews. They were a lot of young offensive coordinators. And this is the spot when I look at all of the vacancies, and we talked about, how many great, candidates are there. This was sort of the one that ended up having the sort of the you've got to have one team because there are as many openings that's not going to get one of those like really, really hot commodities as a candidate. And so that was New Orleans for me. During their first wave of head coaching interviews, they brought in Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator of the Bills. I think that could work. I think that if the Saints think Joe Brady is going to come in and make the Saints the Bills, they would be very, very naive to think that. One, because of the cap situation that they're in right now. But two, not to take away from what Joe Brady has done with the Bills, but when it comes to Josh Allen's development, that was a lot of guys before Joe Brady got there that really did that. That was Dayball. That was he just got fired, I think, as the Browns offensive coordinator. He got fired. What was that?
Was it Alex Van Pelt or was that different?
No,
that's a Van Pelt was the previous one. It was.
Oh, come on. Well, they've already promoted Tommy Rees to the role, so it's
Ken Dorsey.
Ken Dorsey. There we go. It was Dayball, it was Dorsey that really got Josh Allen there. So, but that doesn't mean that a guy like Joe Brady won't be able to come in and make some noise and help turn things around. If not him, another guy that they brought in for initial interviews was Cliff Kingsbury. I think that could be interesting. I think Cliff Kingsbury is a guy that has proven that he's worth at least trying as a head coaching candidate. If you're like, listen, what should we do? Like interviewing him definitely makes sense. It's not like he's had a ton of success. He didn't have a ton. He had some success, but not a ton of success with the Cardinals. He had a lot of success this year with Jaden Daniels, sort of broke through the whole, second half of the season. Cliff Kingsbury doesn't know what he's doing anymore, or teams figure him out, sort of thing we experienced with the Commanders this year. So I think he would be a good candidate. I do think that Aaron Glenn is probably likely at this point going to end up getting that job. I think maybe it's wishful thinking that I want what's best for him, that I don't want him to get that job. I do want him to be a head coach. He deserves it, but I don't want him to get stuck with that. But yeah. So our last one, we mentioned them a little bit earlier, is the Las Vegas Raiders. The Las Vegas Raiders, they fired Antonio Pierce after a year and a half. Really, he was the interim for the Raiders 2 seasons ago, for the end of the year. Got hired to stay on. I'm not going to say that I think that he didn't deserve it, but also like you mentioned, it's very, very similar to the Gerard Mayo situation. Not the exact details of why they ended up being the head coach, but just like you look around, you're like, what coaching experience do you have that, like, if you weren't already around this organization, is another organization going to be like, hey, can we interview this guy to be our head coach? Right, is really, really the way to look at it. I think he definitely brought the locker room together last year, and I think because of that, Mark Davis and the Raiders were like, let's do this again, see if we can build on that momentum. Obviously didn't. Obviously there was turmoil early. Devontae Adams wants out. Again, you finally trade him. Some other stuff with that, and so he gets fired. This is where I have Ben Johnson landing. I think that this is a better situation for him than Chicago would be. Even though he doesn't have a head coach, or he doesn't have a quarterback. I think that he would have much more freedom to do what he wants to do. The thing about Chicago is, like, if Ben Johnson is like, Caleb Williams is good, but he's not the type of quarterback that I would want, like, well, you're stuck with that, right? If you go to the Raiders, you can be very hands-on about, we need a quarterback and this is my guy, right? You don't have to experience that, like, hey, I might get fired because things don't work out with this guy, but he was never the quarterback that I wanted to have in the first place. So I think that makes it desirable. I think that Tom Brady now being a part owner makes it very desirable. They met before the Packers game in Green Bay, that the Lions ended up winning, and was it was a good meeting, apparently, from all the reports, from what Tom Brady and Ben Johnson both had to say about that. So I think that this is where Ben Johnson ends up in Las Vegas. I think a guy that, it's as crazy as this sounds, he was part of the initial round of interviews. I don't know if they've moved forward with this, but Matt Nagy going back to the Chiefs and having success, the Chiefs having success while he was the offensive coordinator there, despite what happened in Chicago, has made him a potentially desirable head coaching candidate again. He's getting interviews. And so I think that Vegas, if there's going to be a place for him to end up, I think it would be Vegas. But obviously, if you're picking between Matt Nagy and Ben Johnson, you're picking Ben Johnson 100 out of 100 times, if you ask me, at least. And so this is where I have Ben Johnson slotted in.
I feel you. I think Ben Johnson is a tremendous candidate, the best candidate post Vrabel being hired by the Patriots in this class, I would say, unless something weird happens or Belichick throwing his name back in the ring. I think Belichick, since the reports are he didn't actually sign the contract with UNC yet, I think that potentially Belichick to the Raiders could be interesting. It's not my pick for a fit. I think that Belichick's one of the weird in between, like Tom Brady hiring Belichick would be a very interesting dynamic since Brady's a part owner of the Raiders. So I find that very interesting. Second interesting one, also not my pick, would be Deion Sanders. I think if he doesn't go to the Cowboys or if he doesn't stay at Colorado, that the third option would probably be the Raiders. I think that they have a shot to take his son or Travis Hunter. Either of those players, I think, obviously could go to the Raiders in this draft. So I think that connection makes sense. I think that Mark Davis obviously is trying to do everything he can to win. I think Tom Brady would probably have the right. I think Tom Brady obviously is the linchpin in all of this, and that I think that Tom Brady would be the one to be able to broker a deal between Belichick and Davis or between Deion and Davis. But I think the deal that Brady's going to strike actually is going to be between Ben Johnson and Mark Davis. I think that that's, as you were saying, I don't think it's the best job. I honestly don't think it's a better job than Chicago. I don't think that it's the ideal job by any stretch, especially for a candidate as good as Ben Johnson. But I think that Tom Brady's going to be able to broker a hell of a deal. I think they're going to offer a bunch of money, and the Raiders have been way more aggressive in their spending for head coaches, especially since moving to Vegas. They've been able to make a lot more money in that new stadium. And I think that they are going to be very aggressive, especially with Tom Brady essentially seemingly running the player personnel football operations side of the team. And so I agree with you. Ben Johnson would probably be my pick, with those other two being thrown in there as potential interesting options that you could see a backdoor just slip right in there and get the job.
Yeah, I think that, I this is where I'm crystal balling Ben Johnson too. So it'll be interesting to see if that's what happens. Or, like, the thing with him, I don't think this is the case with Aaron Glenn. But after last year with Ben Johnson and the way that he approached head coaching vacancies, it would not surprise me if he uses this year again as a way to, negotiate and get more money from the Lions to come back as the offensive coordinator. You know, I mean, because you know he could just keep doing that and doing that and doing that, and every year will come back and he will be the hottest commodity for head coach. So just something to think about. I don't think that's what Aaron Glenn will do at all. I think Aaron Glenn is like, if I get offered a head coaching position, if it's one that, you know, I really want, like, I'm going to take it. But you know, after it is rare that you have a guy that is a coordinator interview for jobs, basically get offered a job and go, no thanks, I'm going to go back to being the offensive coordinator at the team that I'm at. So interesting to see how that will play out. It definitely, as a Lions fan, makes me think that we better win it this year, because if we lose him, who knows? I love Ben Johnson, of course. I think his play design is unmatched. I think some of his play calling is a little suspect at times. Talking about a lot about that Buffalo game, where it's like, all right, this isn't working. We got to pivot faster, you know. But I think he's going to be a great head coach. We'll be sorry to see him go if that is what happens. But we'll see. I'm sure a lot of these things will get sorted out here soon. We'll keep tabs on things and talk more as this all sort of clears up.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody so much for watching, for tuning in and supporting us. We'll see if we get this, see if we get these things right. Who knows? I hope I'm wrong that Deion Sanders is a great NFL head coach for his sake and for the sake of the sport. But you know, you never know how these things play out. So, thanks so much for watching, for enjoying. If you did enjoy, I hope you enjoyed. If not, thanks for watching anyway. Just two guys talking about football and head coaching vacancies. So we'll talk to you next week. Have a good one, everybody.